Fashion series. We're trying to explore different dimensions of fashion industries in order to find ways that makes it more sustainable. Today we have with us Ruby Veridiano, who is a sustainable fashion expert. Hi Ruby, please enlighten our audiences with your core expertise, background, and interests.
My name is Ruby Veridiano. I call myself a sustainable fashion storyteller and educator. I have a background as a journalist, just like you. And I also started my career actually as a performing artist. So when I do stories about sustainable fashion, I try to make it entertaining and lively and energizing because I want people to leave the story feeling inspired by the solutions and activated so that they can feel like they want to be able to get involved as well. I also worked recently as a senior manager of storytelling and global content with an organization called Sustainable Apparel Coalition. And now I work independently as a communications consultant and also as a speaker at universities, where I do a lot of education around sustainability and the fashion industry and helping to equip the next generation of change makers and how to get involved. I've also started to recently lend some of my journalism and performing arts work as an event MC for sustainable fashion conferences to some events around the world. So I'm really excited and grateful to be on this podcast with you and to connect and share our stories together.
You were there in Global Fashion Summit as well, right?
Yes, I had the opportunity to join. Yep, this past May. It was my very first time at Global Fashion Summit, so it was a real pleasure to experience it in person.
All right. So, what according to you is sustainable fashion, and why you have chosen this industry?
Yes, so I think sustainable fashion has many different definitions, but in essence, it's really responsible fashion that does its part to reduce its environmental impact and also does its part to protect the human rights in the global fashion supply chain. So there's the environmental impact, but there's also the human impact. But there's also so many things in between, right? But let's just start there. But I think that the reason why I chose the fashion industry was because I actually started my career in the nonprofit and the NGO sector. I've always been really passionate about making a difference in the world. My medium just happened to be communications, right? So as I mentioned before, I was a performing artist. So my career start was really around using the arts as a platform to get people to care about the things that I cared about. And the field work that I did working in the nonprofit sector and in the NGO sector helps to inform kind of how decisions that get made at like the corporate or the board level affects communities on the ground. So I think that I have the sensitivity. And the reason why I wanted to join the fashion industry was because I wanted to keep that common thread of using creativity as a platform to inspire people to do good things out in the world. But I think fashion has always been something that's been a part of my life. My mom and my grandmother, the maternal side of the family, were all very elegant women. And I learned that, you can express your intellect and your elegance through fashion.
When we see fashion as an industry, so what are the trends you see in the next couple of decades, and how they are different from the past trends?
Yeah, so I think that I wouldn't call them trends, but really around transformative methods to really redefine the fashion business model. So the fashion business model has been operating on a linear system, which is, take from the environment, make the product, and then waste it, right? I think that, no one has been really making any strides to figuring out what is going to happen with the product once the consumer is done with it. So that's how it's led us to creating so much waste, right? There's so much production and no one is accounting for the waste that happens when the consumer is done with the product. So I think that there is definitely a big push towards circularity. And I think that the circular business model is going to be something that is going to take decades to perfect. It's all about transforming an entire system and really transforming a massive fashion supply chain that's been in the works for decades to come. For decades prior. So it's going to take time to move the fashion industry into a circular model, but we're seeing the slow transition to it, right? Sandro is a very big fashion brand. That's based in Paris, very trendy, very fashion forward brand. And I saw earlier this year that they launched a secondhand program. So that's a small step, but I think that's also quite a big deal that they are now taking back some of their products and allowing consumers to drop off their used Sandro products and reselling them in the secondhand market and allowing that to be available to the mass consumer base. So I think that circularity is something that is going to be more normalized. And I think that that's a great step in the right direction. I'm also seeing, we really need to do something about the secondhand waste management. When again, at the Global Fashion Summit, I learned about the work of the OR Foundation, who really supports the secondhand trade market in Ghana. A lot of the Ghanaian secondhand trade market artisans there, they've really done a great job of being able to figure out what to do with the waste that comes, or the fashion excess that comes into their land. And I think that they need support. So I would hope that the fashion industry finds a way to strengthen these markets and allows them to continue doing their work and investing in their infrastructure so that there is an effective way to continue making good things out of old, discarded items. So yeah, I think circularity, secondhand, and that secondhand resale market is going to grow even more in the coming years because Gen Z, they're very aware and keen, and they've normalized the secondhand, pre-loved way of shopping in a way that previous generations haven't.
Waste in fashion industry depends on the consumer demands, right? Because the industry will gonna produce, no matter which industry it is, the industry will gonna produce if the consumer will demand for it, right? So it's create a sort of imbalance between the sustainable practices and increasing consumer demand, because recycling and upcycling is coming up nowadays, but it becomes a little bit tricky somehow.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that that's why it's really important to educate the consumer as well, because all of this sustainability transition is going to take many different actors. It's not only going to depend on businesses. It's not only going to be dependent on governments and policies. It's also going to depend on consumers acting educated and able to then shift that consumer demand into and redirect that so that there are new ways to consume responsibly. So I think that again, consumers are actually demanding for a more responsible industry, right? With the advent of social media, consumers now have a voice, and they have the ability to use their voice to mobilize against practices that they find are unsustainable or unethical. So I think that there is, in the way that there is also consumer demand for certain products, there is a growing consumer demand as well for more responsible production. So I think that we're starting to see that scale tip a little bit. And I think that there is an opportunity here to figure out how to maintain, still good products, but, find other business models or educate consumers about other ways to consume more responsibly so that there is a win-win situation.
And how about greenwashing? Do you think it's a serious threat, or it's a sort of manageable sort of thing?
Well, I think with greenwashing, I think that there are definitely some companies who are intentionally greenwashing, but they can't really get away with that anymore because, again, as I mentioned, we're living in the age of the internet where research can be done from a handheld device, right? And there's a lot of
generally what happens is that when the brand is big, when the brand has a global connect, when the brand has a global reach, it becomes very difficult for the consumer somehow to doubt on that particular brand. So
yes, but I think what is again, as I mentioned, there's all of these different levers that are going to be pulled, right? So there's all of this new policy and regulation that's actually going to make greenwashing a lot harder, because I can't tell you all of the nuances of all of the different policies that are coming out, but some of them do require a due diligence report on, okay, if you're shipping this shipment of product to Europe, for example, Europe might now be demanding then, okay, can you give me a due diligence report with data that proves to me that this was a responsible product. So I think that, greenwashing is something that is going to be a huge reputational risk, but also a huge risk in terms of, breaking policy and breaking laws, which then leads to really big, massive fines, right? So now there is, you're not just answering to the consumer, you're also answering to government. So I think that greenwashing is something that is not only a reputational risk, but a massive business risk if, a company decides to continue doing that. But I also do know that there are a lot of brands out there who are genuinely making a difference. They're genuinely trying to shift their supply chain, and they're doing their best to do the right thing. But again, with all of these new policies and regulations, everyone is just seeking to figure out how to best understand how to align with those policies. And it's going to take time and it's going to take work. But I think that we are on that train to getting there, and we're on that road to, hopefully a better way of doing things.
Policy is the solution at to some extent.
Yeah. Yes.
There was a change in policy in Europe. I think it was there in Global Fashion Summit. Europe is going to apply a huge change in policy there.
Yes, and New York has also, New York being one of the fashion capitals.
Yeah, that's true.
There's also laws coming from New York that are now following that as well. So yes, definitely policy is going to be a big tipping point, as well as, again, consumer citizenship. It's not just about consumer demand, but consumers exercising their citizenship rights to, mobilize against unethical practices. So I think that there are those two big levers that companies have to consider. And I also think that there needs to be partnership that needs to happen between brands and manufacturers so that they can set each other up for success. I think one of the things that happen in the sustainability conversation is that manufacturer voices are often left out of the conversation. And even though policy is a great step forward, policymakers also need to consider the realities of manufacturing countries and understand that, okay, if we're going to be enacting these policies, we need to understand, okay, like, are these policies realistic for manufacturing companies to meet? Because manufacturers are also cannot be left alone with the burden of transforming their factories. It's a huge investment. And we also know that some manufacturing countries don't necessarily have the local government infrastructure or support to help them make those transitions. So there needs to be healthy partnerships between brands and suppliers, aka manufacturers, to then be able to set each other up for success together.
Right. Do you believe in fast fashion or slow fashion, or a sort of balance between both of them?
I think it's a balance between both of them. I mean, I think that we definitely need to slow fashion down, but the general public needs to have accessible clothing. I do, there's a lot. We mentioned circularity earlier, but I don't think that we can talk about circularity without addressing overproduction. Okay, like, we cannot circularity our way out of an overproduction problem. So that's why I think that the fashion industry really needs to think about their business model, because a linear business model from before may not work anymore, especially because we are in a climate emergency. And even if you have circular programs, if you're continuing to overproduce, none of the circularity programs are actually going to help you reduce your environmental impact, right? It's an oxymoron. So I think that in terms of fast fashion and slow fashion, there needs to be a balance, and there needs to be a way to reduce the cost of an environmentally or a sustainable product, so that the general public can continue being able to have decent clothing.
All right, great. At macro level, in the industry, when we see the challenges and opportunities, so what, according to you, are the critical aspect of it for the fashion to be sustainable?
To have healthy collaborations and long-term collaborations. I think that if you look at the way the industry has worked in the past, or even currently, you have brands who, are the customers. And if the manufacturer cannot cater to their every need, they threaten to leave them, right? And I think that's a very unhealthy, way of doing business together. I think that if there were long-term partnerships and long-term investments, it's going to create a healthier way of working together so that the manufacturers feel like they can make the investments in their factories without feeling as if they're going to lose their customers or their clients, right? So I think that there needs to be a healthy collaboration to set each other up for success. Because if you think about it, if a brand wants to be able to say that their products were made sustainably, they need to set the manufacturer up so that the manufacturer can have the factories and the facilities that are, able to provide renewable energy and solar panels and clean water and so forth. But that's going to take, again, like a partnership to be able to make that a long-term investment and a long-term goal. So that's one thing. Number two, I think that it really, again, it's about consumer education, really needing to be able to equip the general public with how they can get involved in sustainability. I think that if we work in the industry, there's a lot of science and a lot of language that is really hard to define. Even when I was working in the industry, sometimes I'd be like, gosh, the more I know, the less I know, because all of this science talk can be really complex and complicated. And at the end of the day, we need to make this accessible to the everyday person, especially because we are living in a very interconnected world right now. The third thing is really about equipping better education for folks who are going to be the next generation of fashion industry change makers. I think that the fashion education system has traditionally taught the same practices that are keeping linear fashion systems alive.
Do you visit the universities and colleges as a guest lecturer as well?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. So I do guest lectures at universities and colleges, not just fashion schools, but even just, universities who have students who are interested in having a sustainable career. It might not be in fashion, but I think that there are lessons to learn from the fashion industry that, every student should learn about so that it can inform their decisions as they plan out their future. But I think that, again, like Sustainable Fashion Education has kept up this same education program that is still based on a linear fashion system, the take, make, and waste model. And we need more education that is going to help students understand how to play a part in the transformative or in industry transformation.
Do you think that fashion empowers women and somehow, somewhere?
So many women are affected by the global supply chain. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think there's around 60 million people who are employed as garment workers in this fashion supply chain, and 80% of that number are women and girls ages 18 to 35, which is ironically the same demographic of women that consume fashion, right, in other parts of the world. So there's this really big disconnect about, hey, here's how fashion can empower women to be their best selves, but at the same time, the way that fashion is made disempowers women and girls of the same demographic on the other side of the world. So I think that, again, the more that we enlighten people with that story and how that their personal stories connect with our own, I think that that's what's going to inspire people to get involved and create change. And I think for me personally, I've always been a champion of Asian American voices because I grew up in America where Asian voices were not common. And, I internalize the feeling of being unseen and unrepresented, right? So if I was really, truly passionate about empowering women, especially Asian American women, to find their voice, then I also had to be equally passionate about the fact that Asian women in manufacturing countries are disempowered and their voices are taken away from them every day in their own workplace. So I think that is actually, that common thread is exactly the reason why I got involved in sustainable fashion in the first place, and why my commitment to this work is so strong.
What advice would you like to give to the aspiring fashion designer?
Ooh, for aspiring fashion designers, well, I would encourage you all to, number one, understand that sustainability starts with your design choices. You have a big responsibility. The way that you decide to design a garment is actually going to impact so many people, right? So if you design something and the materials you choose, for example, right? There's obviously, you have to make the garment functional. You can't wear a yoga pant that is made out of, silk, for example. So of course you have to think about the functionality of the garment, but all of the materials that you choose have an impact, right? It's going to be an environmental impact, but also, again, like even the way that you decide to sew the garment, or however the garment is put together, is also going to impact how it's assembled. So think about the human hands that are going to make your clothes. Is this actually going to be something that will be feasible for them from a mass production level, for example? So I think that, yes, so sustainability is definitely starts at the design choice. So definitely educate yourself on the whole fashion system, not just the glossy, glamorous side of fashion, which I think is, again, what most fashion designers were educated to want and think about as they launch their businesses, but really understand the supply chain. Understand manufacturer relationships, supplier relationships, understand how you can create those healthy partnerships, understand how your design decisions impact the local communities, the local manufacturing communities where you will be producing, and understand all of the things that go on on the ground. If you have an opportunity to visit a factory, do that, because again, like all of the decisions that you make in your design studio is going to create an impact on the field with the communities that are going to be making the clothes. So understanding that whole fashion system, I think, is really valuable. When I was going to graduate school, even though I was working in communications, our professors made sure that we understood all the different aspects of the industry. They knew that I cared a lot about sustainable fashion, so they made me take fashion business classes, because they said, okay, even though you're not interested in fashion business development, you need to understand what business decisions are being made so that you can actually then be able to make sustainability a part of those business decisions and make it so that it's a win-win situation for everyone. So understanding the whole fashion system, but also taking classes to make sure that you're also educated on the sociology of fashion is really important. Take developmental classes, that are social development classes, so that you can really understand how your work impacts people, and how it can protect the planet in a very meaningful way.
And don't forget to take advice from Ruby as well.
Oh, and don't forget to listen to this podcast. You're bringing all the information to the people in your audience. So I'm really grateful to be a part of it.
Anything else you would like to share?
Gosh, I mean, I just want people to be curious. If you have any questions for me, I'm always happy to try my best to answer them. It's really, I'm very easy to find. It's just my first and last name, Ruby Veridiano. And that's also how you find me on Instagram or LinkedIn and so forth. So I'm just, I'm constantly creating educational content that empowers consumers to make better choices. And also maybe even for fashion designers, I might start creating content for you as well. So definitely connect with me there, and hopefully some of the information that I share will be helpful in your own sustainable fashion journey and career.
All right, then. Thank you so much for your valuable time, Ruby. And it was really a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.